your first 10 employees are the most important employees. Like if you think about, like if you have 3 bad employees out of 10, that means 30% of your workforce is not producing at the level that you need. And so you need to have an incredibly high standard. The second thing is, typically there's 95% right, 5% wrong. And I really try to lean on the 95% right and make people feel great about themselves, as opposed to the 5% wrong. It's important that your team members know that you care, even if they're not a good employee. Like even if you're going to let them go, that doesn't mean they're bad people. Like you can still do it in a caring way. But I think it's really important that they know that there's love, that there's caring, that you want to do right by them. So that's another big aspect. And then the third one is, I believe in this concept of a performance-based culture. And there needs to be a certain level of intensity to thrive in a competitive environment.
What would you do if you had a $10,000 prize to put towards your business, or £10,000, 10,000 monies? And how confident are you that you could turn that 10K into 40 million? How long would it take you? And what would be the important KPIs, targets, goals, the things you should be measuring along that journey to achieve success? What role would your leadership play in all of this? Well, as it happens, my guest today has done this very thing. He took a 10K prize from winning a business plan competition, and over the 16 years after that, he turned that into a $40 million revenue digital agency. He now runs a company called Fiscal Advocate, where he helps business service companies turn that financial data into an engine for growth. And he's here today to share some of his practical insights, his experiences, his lessons about business, life, and leadership with us. His name is Jon Morris, and he's all about helping people create profitable, sustainable businesses. If you're listening to this podcast because you are a leader in a business and you are struggling to get the most from your people, you're hitting things like imposter feelings or imposter experience, your confidence maybe is taking a knock as well, you feel like you don't quite know enough about leadership, about management, about getting the best from a team, and you don't know where to start, where to turn, I'm here to offer you a solution. Come and join my Integrity Leaders community. It's designed, it's built for leaders just like you. It's all online, it's all remote, it's accessible on your phone, on your laptop, on your computer, whatever is easiest to you. We have regular events, we have a knowledge base, we have courses, and we have a community of other leaders in similar situations. It's a leadership safe space where you can ask your questions, share your worries, learn from colleagues. So if you want to be more O'Neill and less Kinsey, if you want to be more James Holden and less Marco Inaros, if you're looking to be the Kirk, the Picard, the Janeway, then this is the community for you. Details on the screen, in the show notes, and if you have any questions or you want more information before you hit that all-important sign-up button, then you'll also find my LinkedIn details down there too. So reach out, connect, drop me a message, and let's chat leadership today. That's enough from me. Let's welcome Jon onto the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Jon, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Great to have you on the show today. I'm sure we've got a great conversation ahead of us.
David, thanks so much for having me here today.
I'm going to push you in at the deep end, I'm afraid, to kick us off. Tell us about your life story, well, your career story so far, what you do today, why you do it, all of those lovely things.
Yep. So I'm actually, before I get into what I do today, I'm just going to go back to my history a little bit. In 2004, I started a digital agency. I won $10,000 in a business plan competition. And I used that money as seed money to start Rise Interactive, which I grew to just under $40 million in 16 years and then exited it 6 years ago. And when I think of like the secret to our success, it was how we leveraged financial data to improve our decision making. And I thought it would be really fun to help other entrepreneurs and other marketing and tech service companies have similar success by learning the playbooks I used at Rise. So today, Fiscal Advocate is the company I own, and we do finance management, strategic planning, and executive coaching for marketing and tech service companies. And been doing it for 5 years, and it's been going incredibly well. I love my clients. I love the business. I love the employees I work with. So it's been a good journey.
Yeah, I mean, 5 years, that must have been an interesting 5 years with all the stuff that was going on in the world.
It's been incredibly interesting. And it's, I've learned a lot in terms of, for example, I am a data person. Like I live and breathe in numbers. It's my comfort zone. And I'm now working with a lot of people who, they probably went into marketing because they didn't want to deal with numbers. They're a creative. And so it's, how do you develop a solution that allows them to be sophisticated, while at the same time not overwhelming them with the data entry, the structuring the data, all the things that's necessary to make them successful.
You've hit immediately there on one of the great challenges of leadership, I think, is these kind of these different approaches, different ways of thinking. And I mean, you hear it a lot from the numbers person that they don't like people so much. And I feel like that's a bit of an unfair generalization. But
I would say that, first of all, I love people and I love helping people, and that's why I do what I do. But I do believe that there's a harshness when you are a numbers person. The numbers tell a story, and you believe passionately that you want people to follow the guidance of what the numbers say. And so that's where I do believe compassion oftentimes is lost. What I always tell people is whatever job you do, determine what the hardest part of that job is and make sure that you can do it. And when you think about a service-based company, 80% of your costs are people. But they're not just people. They're people you love. They're people you've been in the trenches with. They're people you deeply care about. And when the numbers tell you that you have to reduce your cost, what they're really saying is that you have to reduce the amount of people you have, or you have to reduce the payroll across the board. And so, you are, moving into territory that becomes very emotional and very hard to do. And, I can tell you from my own point of view, there are times where the numbers tell me what to do, but emotionally, I don't want to do what they tell me. So it is learning to have that emotional strength to do what the numbers say, even though you might not want to.
Yeah, and I guess the flip side of that is sometimes you can hide in the numbers as well. So if it is an emotional situation like layoffs or something, it's much easier to detach if you just focus on the numbers and try and set the other bit aside. I've seen a few people do that over the years.
There's a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about there's been these massive layoffs from these huge companies in the United States. So Amazon, Verizon, I forget who else, I think Target. And I was talking about how cold the methods have been to let people go, But and if you think about logistically, like if you're firing 15,000 people, like how do you do that with, humanity and heart and love and caring? And I would say that they all kind of missed the mark, in my opinion, where, some of them were fired via text message, and it was just a corporate text message that, thank you for your service. You've been let go. There'll be a meeting tomorrow to tell you all about it. So the numbers might say that they need to cut it, but that doesn't mean that you still can't do it where you treat people with dignity and love and respect and caring and figure out ways to help them. And, all the things that make them passionate about the brand, even though they might be getting delivered hard news.
I mean, there was another high profile one, wasn't there, a year or two ago, where a large number of people were sacked via a Zoom call with no warning.
Yeah.
And you can kind of sympathize with both sides to an extent, because it's an incredibly difficult thing to have to do as a leader. And it will feel like you're admitting failure, admitting defeat almost. But at the same time, like, there's better ways of doing that, isn't there? And,
Yes.
like, you must realize how that's going to make people feel.
I mean, and it's interesting. I mean, most of the clients I deal with are far from the laying off 10,000 to 15,000 people. That is a scenario logistically. Like when I read the article, they talked about just like security alone, where they didn't want to have, a chance where, while they're having a conversation with one person, the next person could be doing bad things. And so, there's interesting challenges that you have to think about when you're dealing with scale. But 99% of the people, 100% of the people I deal with are dealing with either people in the dozens or hundreds, but they're laying off people in the single digits to the double digits. They can do it in a way that's personalized and meaningful and heartfelt.
I guess once you get to those ridiculous sizes, it will all come down to your management structure, I suppose, and like how personal the management really is. Which, having never worked for some of these massive corporations, I'm just guessing there's probably quite a few levels removed, aren't there? And there's probably quite a lot of people per manager, per leader at each level. And it's a problem of scale, isn't it, I suppose?
I think it's a problem of scale, but I also think, it's so easy when you don't know somebody to just look at them as a number, and look, I definitely rise to the point where I didn't know everybody. And, but I still try to care deeply. But, if you go from, I was 250 employees when I left. If you grow to 1,000, you grow to 10,000, like you're making decisions in a much more non-emotional way because you don't know these people. You don't know the impact they're having in their business or their individual lives. You don't know their story. And so you're managing it in a much different way.
Yeah. It's, I was going to say it's about values and priorities, isn't it? But I guess even then, it's best will in the world. And there's so many cliches on there, like out of sight, out of mind, stuck into my brain there. Because it is harder to feel connected to people if you don't know them, you've never met them. And I don't know. There's some commentary here about humanity and the human condition and whether these giant corporations are actually good or bad, which I'm not sure I want to get into today.
And I don't know if that's my core expertise.
No, me neither. But it's interesting academically, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Going back to your beginnings then, so a $10,000 win in a business plan competition. Tell us more about how you turn that into like a tens of millions agency.
So I used to train for marathons. And the first thing is I had a very long-term view of my business. And I took marathon training and I applied it to my business. So typically when you train for a marathon, it's 18 weeks. And your first long run is 6 miles, which is, I don't know, probably like 8 kilometers or so. And then the next week you do a longer run and then it goes down and then up again and then down. And, so using miles, it went 6 miles, 7 miles, 5, 9, 10, 7, 12, 13, 10, and so I took the same view, but rather than miles, rather than weeks, I thought of it as years. And rather than miles, I thought of it as US dollars. And so that's the first thing is I had a very long-term view. I didn't worry about the exit. I wanted to build a great company. That's one of the first things that I believe is really important is so many people are focused on like, I want to build this and sell it in 5 years. And I want to build something special. I want to build something meaningful. I want to build something that lasts, time, the test of time. So that was one thing that I did. The second thing is I'm an incrementalist. And so the idea is that generally around July, I start planning the next year. And I think about the investments I want to make. And I just want next year to be better than the year before. And if you can do that consistently, it compounds upon itself. And so that was a big part of our strategy. And then, as I mentioned, I really knew the numbers well. I knew what all the benchmark numbers were, and I knew how to use those numbers to my advantage. So, for example, we had a gross margin advantage, meaning we were servicing customers more profitably than our competition. That gave me more money to put into sales and marketing and to put into innovation. I knew how much to spend in the back office, and I knew that we had an amazing infrastructure in the back office, but I spent less as a percent of revenue than my competition, which gave me more money to put into sales and marketing and innovation. I knew what the benchmark numbers were for profitability, and I actually had a lower profitability target, which allowed me to put more money into sales and marketing and innovation. And so the idea is that if you're spending your sales and marketing dollars intelligently and you're spending more as a percent of revenue than everyone else, you're going to put yourself on a path to growth. And if you're spending your innovation dollars intelligently and it's having an impact to your clients and it's having an impact to new business and if it's having an impact to your margins, it's going to put you on a path to growth. And so, we were able to go from 1 million to 2 million, 2 million to 4, 4 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 to 13, 13 to 19, 19 to 24 million, 24 to 30, 30 to 37.5, and that's when I exited. So you can see that these investments were paying off. It was scaling and growing the business.
As you said at the beginning, it's knowing the numbers and using those to drive the decisions, isn't it? And when you explain it like that, it sounds really simple. But I'm sure it's not.
Look, in everything, it's difficult. But the first thing is just a commitment to doing it. I think it's really funny. I owned a marketing agency, and I would meet with competitors of mine that were substantially smaller. And they all asked me how I did it. And I would reverse it. I'd say, what percent of your revenue do you spend on sales and marketing? And I would say 9 out of 10 times the answer was, I don't spend any money on sales and marketing. It's all word of mouth. So think about it. You're a marketing agency that doesn't even believe in marketing. And so, I didn't want to be the only marketer actually, I did want to be the only marketer that believed in marketing because it allowed me to grow my business. But, you can't wish growth to happen. You have to budget for growth to happen. And so if you think about growing, it's really 3 numbers. It's your renewal rate, it's how good you are at upselling, and it's how good you are at winning new business. And if you can get better at those 3 things every single year, you can create something special. And when you take new business, there's only 4 numbers that matter. It's how many at-bats do you have, or how many opportunities per month do you get? What's your win rate? What's your average order value? And what's your sales cycle? So the idea is that you want the least amount of numbers possible to analyze so that you can focus on what you're going to improve.
Yes. And my next question is going to be about the 3 KPIs.
All you have is time and money.
Mm-hmm. And
you want to spend that time and money as intelligently as possible. And I really believe that if you just focus on 3 KPIs, and I'll talk about the KPI pyramid secondly, because I already got into that a little bit. But the first KPI is how much cash do you have relative to your monthly overhead? If you have lots of cash, you have lots of optionality. And I like to use this as my example, which is Microsoft bought LinkedIn for $26.2 billion in an all-cash deal. Think about that. They had that much cash just sitting around that they could go buy a company for, double-digit billions of dollars. So growing your cash is a really important goal. The second one is your profit margin. If you're in the service-based industry, 20% of your revenue should be profit. Now, as I mentioned, I had a lower target. I had 5% for many years. So I was giving up profit to fuel growth. And that paid off. But if I wasn't seeing the growth in my revenue, then I would go back to the 20%. Like it all has to normalize to 20% at some point. And then the third one is year over year revenue growth. Those are the three KPIs. So if you can grow at 20% or greater for the service-based space, 20% profit margin, and then I want you to have 2.5 times whatever your monthly overhead is. So if you spend $100,000, dollars or 100,000 pounds per month, I want you to have 250,000 in a savings account set aside, and ideally growing, but that's the minimum I want for you. And so all your time and energy should be focused on those three numbers.
Makes sense to me. And so it's one of these things. Why do you think so few business owners think about these specific KPIs and about the numbers more generally? And why maybe do they not want to as well? It's a bit of a loaded question, that.
Well, so I would say it's two different things. I think reason number one is they don't know. I was at a sales pitch about 2 years ago, and the guy's like, I'm pretty sophisticated. I look at 315 different KPIs every single day. And, so like in his mind, he's a data-driven person. He's a numbers guy. And he was proud of like how many KPIs he was looking at. I want to take him to the opposite point of view. I want you to be so proud that I got the numbers so simple that there's only 3 numbers. I actually got it down to 1. I have something called the CPR score, which is our own proprietary scoring system, which is basically an algorithm that takes your cash, your profit margin, and your revenue and creates it into one score. Think of it as like a credit score, but rather than for you as an individual, it's for your service-based company. And so that's the first thing, is just, learning and thinking about how do you simplify and how do you get it to the least amount of numbers. That's reason number one. Reason number two is, for a lot of people, there's just discomfort in numbers. Like they just don't, want that. And then the third one, which I think is a really big deal and something that's very real, is the emotional aspect of what the numbers tell you. If your profit margin is too low, if you're not growing on a year over year basis, sometimes you just don't want to accept reality. It's easier to put your head in the sand, than to actually get going. Make the decisions you need to make.
315 KPI. I mean, that is, wow.
It's a lot.
You wouldn't have time to do anything else if that's taking it, obviously a step too far, but you must really love numbers if you're going that far with it.
Yeah. But that's a training scenario. There's a chairman of my company, a guy named Jim Bauman, and Jim took a company from 500 million to 1.2 billion in sales. And if I could give him a new title as opposed to chairman, I would call him the Chief Simplification Officer. His sole job is to just think about how you reduce steps, make things easier. How do you shorten meetings? How do you shorten deliverables? He's constantly pushing us to that. And I think it's such an important thing to do.
It's a double-edged sword of the modern age, isn't it? There's all this data there for whatever you want it for, I suppose. But also there's all this data there.
Yeah.
And you can get lost in it way too easily. So I think, that knack for simplifying and for picking out which data points are actually valuable and we can learn from. That's got to be one of the biggest underrated skills in any business, hasn't it?
Absolutely. And what I'll tell you is, my favorite quote is by Mark Twain. And it says, "I'm sorry this letter is so long. I did not have time to make it short." People don't realize how hard it is to simplify things. And it takes time and energy. We build a lot of technology. So like I mentioned our service offering, but we have technology that goes along with it, or you could just license the technology directly. And I talk about our goal is simple and elegant. And oftentimes, I'll get a demo of something that we're about to release. And I'm like, what? It's just not simple and elegant enough. If I'm confused, our clients are going to be confused. And we have to go back to the drawing board and get it to be simple and elegant.
Yeah, that's a great way of thinking of it. Weird coincidence, you're not the first person to give me that quote, even in the last month. So I don't know, it must be in people's consciousness for some reason at the moment.
Yeah. And by the way, if you look it up, I don't know if Mark Twain really said it. He definitely said it, but I don't know if he is the true source. But it's easier to just give him the source as opposed to some unknown person.
Yeah. I've heard there's a story behind that, but I don't know what it is. So There we go. What we're kind of circling around here is this sort of strategic planning process, aren't we? And you've alluded to it already, I think. But I mean, so for a first-time business owner, say, or a new director or a manager who's taken on some sort of P&L responsibility, something like that. I mean, what would be your best advice on how to actually build a decent process that will come out with a strategy, a plan that drives results instead of just becomes fodder for next year's meeting?
Yeah. So the first thing is, 2026 is around the corner. So if you don't have your plan already done, you're behind the 8 ball. And the reason why is because, if you have a 30 to 45 day sales cycle, your year has already started. The leads that you get today in November are going to be your clients that you'll win in January. And so what I generally recommend is a top-down and then bottoms-up approach to your target revenue and profit goal. So, and what I've learned is that when you create a revenue goal, whatever that number is what you spend up to. So if you're like, I'm going to do 5 million next year and you did 3 million this year, you're going to start increasing your expenses. And so I really want you to be careful about not picking too aggressive of a revenue goal. But everything starts with the revenue. Then what you need to do is take out all of your existing clients and you need to predict how much revenue you're going to get from that group of people by line of business, by service offering. Then you have to look at what you've done historically from a new business perspective. And, I want you to challenge yourself to, if you all of a sudden are expecting to do substantially more in sales, what's going to change? Like, why are you doing this differently? And make sure that you're not being overly optimistic in that scenario. And so once you have, there's 4 things I want you to have in your plan. So I want you to have a revenue goal, a profit goal, a cash goal, and what I'll call as an infrastructure goal. Revenue, profit, and cash, you need a bottoms up, really well built out plan so that the numbers are believable. That you know what your new business is, you know what you need to achieve. The second thing, or this infrastructure goal though, is the idea is that at the end of the year, so December 31st, I want you to be able to say that your business is better than it was on January 1st. And that you know what investments you're making to make that real. I feel like wholeheartedly going into 2026 that my business is better than it was at the beginning of 2025. And I can give you very tangible things in terms of the investments we made in our technology, the investments we made in marketing, where our brand is. We're in a position of strength, or at least stronger than we were in the beginning of 2025. Then what I want to say is, once you decide what investments you need to make, you need to get it in the budget. If it's not in the budget, it's most likely not going to happen. And it's not important to you. If you can't dedicate at least 1 FTE to something, like you don't want to spend that type of money, then I don't believe that that's something you really want to invest in. And then once you've come up with your annual goal, I then like to break it up into quarterly goals. And what are you going to do in 90-day periods to achieve, your annual goals? And so that is the kind of the methodology I recommend. So I recommend annual planning. It's based on cash, profit, revenue, and infrastructure. And then you have 90-day quarterly initiatives that are focused on achieving those annual goals.
Okay. Which sounds very straightforward, doesn't it? But I guess
Yep.
the knack is in picking realistic goals, as always.
Yep.
So for that first-time leader then, or first-time business founder, business owner, what would be the best bit of advice you could offer them?
The first thing I'd recommend is make sure that you have a product people really care about. Generally speaking, you're going to put your best foot forward in the sales process. And, I want to make sure that whatever you sell, what you deliver is better than what you sold. And by the way, I am guilty of, like if I had to go back to fiscal advocate in my beginning years, I think I oversold. I don't think my product was as ready. And if I could have done it differently, I would have been more honest about where I am as a product and that, you're going to be a guinea pig and you'll get a discounted rate as opposed to coming out of the gate too quickly. So that's one aspect. The second one is you got to find one method to acquire customers at scale, at a low cost. And it might require some testing to figure out what that is, but those are the crucial elements that you need to think about in terms of how you get there. The third thing I'd say is for whatever industry you're in, try to understand the benchmark numbers. What should your gross margin be? How much should you spend in sales and marketing? What should your profit be? And figure out how to use that information to make strategic decisions on where you're going to allocate your dollars.
Yeah, I mean, it's great advice. I guess the recurring theme from the conversation so far actually is for any business owner. I mean, and I think this is the other thing as well. It's not just business owners, is it? It's anyone in a management or leadership role really needs to get a grip of the numbers, or at least understand what they are, what they look like, and what those KPIs are and what they mean, and how the people you're leading are contributing to achieving those goals. Because I think too many of us, it's someone else's problem, isn't it? And it's very easy to ignore it. Even CEOs tend to traditionally make that the CFO's problem.
Yep.
I don't know. Maybe maybe I'm drawing too great a generalization there again, but I feel like that's where these companies go off the rails so easily, isn't it? It's because those top leaders just don't understand the numbers.
They don't understand the numbers, and sometimes they do understand the numbers, but they're slow in their decision making.
Yes. Decision paralysis is quite an interesting one from a leadership perspective, isn't it? That's come up before. I think, those sort of the procrastination type leaders, and then also the opposite extreme, the chasing the shiny objects all the time. So they never finish the last one before they move on to the next one. And they're both bad decision making, but for different reasons.
Yeah.
A few questions for you then about the leadership aspects. I think there's some really useful advice you've given us there about the numbers and running businesses and making them actually work as business entities. I think there's also the people side of it as well, though. So thank you for that so far, because it's not a subject we get into that much on the podcast. So that is really useful.
Yeah.
So from the people leadership aspect, what would you say has been your biggest lesson from your career so far?
So the first thing is you need to surround yourself with A players. And if you have a B player that you can't turn into an A player, you need to let them go. If you have a C player, you have to let them go. But, especially if you're small, your first 10 employees are the most important employees. If you think about if you have 3 bad employees out of 10, that means 30% of your workforce is not producing at the level that you need. And so you need to have an incredibly high standard. The second thing is, typically there's 95% right, 5% wrong. And I really try to lean on the 95% right and make people feel great about themselves, as opposed to the 5% wrong. It's important that your team members know that you care. Even if they're not a good employee, even if you're going to let them go, that doesn't mean they're bad people. You can still do it in a caring way. But I think it's really important that they know that there's love, that there's caring, that you want to do right by them. So that's another big aspect. And then the third one is, I believe in this concept of a performance-based culture. And there needs to be a certain level of intensity to thrive in a competitive environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to disagree with any of those.
Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one. So when you talk about A, B, and C players and good versus bad, I think
Yeah.
like the natural first step there is knowing what good and bad is in that context. And again, it's sort of like the numbers thing, isn't it? I think a lot of leaders don't think about that until it's too late, until they've already got a bad one because they didn't think about it early enough. And then you're already down that sort of rabbit hole of you've formed that personal connection. The emotion of the situation is getting involved, and it's harder to make that decision.
That's one of the things I would say is you picked a really good point of they might not know what good or bad is. I have a client of mine, and the CEO I've talked to is says that regularly is she thinks she needs to train the people on what is good, like they just don't know. And so I think that's really important. Are you a sports person at all? Like, is there like a sort of sport you like?
Not really. Formula One, car racing.
Okay, I mean, but you think about the pit crew, and coming in and like they need to operate in unison. And if you have a weak player, like it brings the whole race down, right? Like if they're not getting out fast enough, like that's a big deal. And so, the reason why I brought up sports is because oftentimes, I'll see people yelling at the TV and talking about like, why is this person still on the team? And then you go look at their own team and you're like, well, why are these people still on your team? And so, I think people have to really hold their team to a higher standard. Just so you know, business is a team sport. In my opinion, it's the greatest team sport. And every year there is a full year season, that you get to play the game. And, so you have to make sure you have the right team in place. Then you have to think about mentorship, training, development, how you grow those people as an individual.
Absolutely. So you've hit two things there that I really want to pick up on, actually. So I'd say the same about leadership. Like it seems from the outside that leadership is like a one person sport, right? But it's definitely not. And if you think that way, you're doing it wrong. Like I don't even need to know anymore. It's about the team. That's the point of leading, isn't it?
Yep.
And then the other one, so the pit crew is such a great example of what I was talking about in terms of knowing what good and bad looks like. Because you could look at that entity and go, right, the key thing here is we need to be fast because the fastest car wins the race. Therefore, your tire change, whatever it is, has to be the fastest possible, which is makes perfect sense. That's what good looks like. And then they do it so fast that they don't finish the job. The car pulls away, the wheel comes off, and they're disqualified. There's rarely just the one good thing, is there? You've got to have multiple things quite often. I think that's quite a good kind of analogy for business.
And the cool thing is that's a very measurable thing, right?
True.
Like, you get to see for every race and for every season how you stacked up against your competition. And, if you're not number one, you got work to do. And it's a question of your level of desire and intensity to, achieve that.
So we may have already talked around these anyway, but I'm going to ask you just for fun. What do you think are the most common mistakes that leaders make, and what should we all be doing to avoid those mistakes?
So I think a couple things. I think the first one is, and I'm very guilty of this at Rise. And, Rise was a success, so you might want to challenge me on this, but I spent way too much time on the 5% as opposed to the 95%. So, which is not it's not a great way to manage, in my opinion, because your employees constantly feel like crap, and I want to uplift my employees. I want them to feel amazing. So that to me is one big deal. The second one is, I see all the time wishy-washy decision making, and you need a leader. I have a saying. I didn't create the saying, but I use it, which is, I'm not always right, but I am always certain. When I make a decision, I stick by that decision. I will course correct if I made the wrong decision. I'll own the mistake. But that's the next one. I think the third one is you need to come from a growth mindset, and that you are okay making mistakes, but you want to learn. I am constantly reading and trying to grow as an individual, trying to grow as a business person. 90% of what I read are business related books on how to do different things better.
Yeah, and I can see between all three of those, there's a level of interconnectedness, isn't there? Because that certainty of decision, the quality of decision making is, again, it's something that I think about quite a lot as well, because it's obviously quite relevant to leadership. But there is that point, isn't there, where you hold out too long for the perfect decision.
Yep.
Because you're seeking that certainty that is probably unachievable.
And look, I think it also depends on the individual. I tell this story quite a bit, but my brother and I would visit my grandparents every summer in Boston when we were young. And they would take us to this store called Bradley's, which was like a, very similar to like a Target, or, like and they had a big toy aisle. And we'd each get $10, and we would sprint to the toy aisle. And I would look at all the toys, I'd scan them, I'd see what I want, and I would grab it, and I'd instantly go to the checkout counter, I'd give him my $10, and I had my toy. My brother would be there for about an hour, and he'd have to find the perfect toy, and he would look at it, evaluate, and figure out eventually what toy he was going to pick. Then he was older than me. We'd get in the car, and he'd want my toy, and he would grab it from me, and, and I use this example because my brother and I are just built differently. I'm a very quick decision maker, and I typically don't look back. And I'm blessed with that. I think it's a competitive advantage. Now, he is a very big, deep thinker and spends a lot of time going into insights that I would never come up with, because he's so thorough in his analysis. And I think that's part of his competitive advantage and his skill set. But I see regularly people go way too far before they're willing to make a decision, and then they still doubt that decision. And so my recommendation is, if it's not natural to you, get better at it, invest in it, figure out how to improve in that area.
Yeah, there's plenty of low stakes decisions, aren't there, where you can practice that skill without feeling like the sky might fall in if you make the wrong choice. But even in like the big important decisions, I think it's pretty rare, even in this day and age, that one decision is going to destroy everything. Like, unless it's something really, really bad, right?
Most of these decisions are not so mission critical. It kind of goes back to my saying the focus on the 5% versus the 95%. Is, I felt that like every mistake was so massive. And I really don't think it was that massive. Have you watched Ted Lasso at all, by any chance?
Yes, I have.
It's amazing because it's obviously, a comedy show that relates to football or soccer, but I think there's so much great management training built into that show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I think, even with the big important decisions though, what you said earlier was absolutely spot on. It's that ability to course correct and have a bit of flexibility, and not like be certain of the decision at the time, but also open to the fact that things might change next week, or a new bit of information might happen, or a pandemic might happen. Like, you have to be open to changing that decision if needs must. Which again, I think quite a lot of us, particularly in our sort of first early management careers, you want to project confidence, and so it almost becomes dogmatic. You stick to the decision. No, this is the plan. This is what we're doing. We're not changing it now. We need to see it through. And it leads people down all sorts of
And that's where coming
routes.
up with your annual goals and making sure your quarterly initiatives are aligned to those goals is such an important exercise.
Absolutely. Fair point. So what would be your best memory of actually being led?
It's a great question. I would say I had a mentor, a guy named Jack Kraft, who was the former CEO and CFO of Leo Burnett. And I would meet with him minimum once a week and talk to him almost every day. And we talk about quick decision making. His problem with me was I would fire and then aim. And he was like, John, I want you to aim, then aim again, then fire. And, so I talk about how people need to get better at, making quick decisions. I think his was, I made my decisions too quick. And so I think that was good guidance for me. I think Jim Bauman's focus on simplification has been incredibly helpful in this journey here. But a lot of times I'm led by my employees, it's the opposite. It's learning what's important to them. And there's times I've been stubborn and, it's taken me a long time to accept good feedback from, the team that had the courage to be like, John, you're missing the boat here and you need to focus on this.
Yeah, I think that decision-making piece is, we've talked about it a lot already, but I don't know, I guess I'm sort of in the middle between you and your brother to an extent, because for me, it depends on what the decision is about. It's very contextual. Yeah. So like personal life, I quite often, I'm and R about things for ages, or like, what are we doing this weekend? What are we having for dinner? That sort of stuff. I'm really indecisive. Work stuff, generally, I'm pretty good. Yeah. Unless it's like a really big, far-reaching decision, and then I have that classic decision paralysis, put it off, procrastination. And I know I'm bad at it, and I'm working on it, but it's, I guess all people are different, aren't they? And yeah, I don't suppose you're a Star Wars fan at all, are you? Hard to tell, you might be, but
I would say somewhat.
Somewhat.
I do notice your Millennium Falcon. Is that a Lego set?
It is, yeah. I've got the old International Space Station up there as well. So the reason I ask is what you're saying about Ready, Fire, Aim. I used to have a T-shirt, Star Wars with a stormtrooper on it, saying Ready, Fire, Aim, because they're notorious for always being off target.
Yeah, I am a big Lego fan. So if you look, you can see that Pac-Man right there.
I can. Very cool.
That is a Lego set, and then you can't see it on the other side, but I have like 5 Lego sets where I do these large Lego sets with my daughter. I find as she's getting older, it's disappearing. But but she would make me then put them on my desk. So I have like a piano, but I had a Yoda on my desk for a long time.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, there's definitely a space theme to my Lego. Behind the camera, I've got that 1.5 meter Saturn V Apollo 11.
Very cool.
That's very cool, yeah. That was a Boxing Day well spent a few years ago. Right. Anyway, so John, I've only got 2 questions left for you. They are slightly less serious, but also always fun to hear the answers. So the first one is the time travel question. If you could go back in time and start your business or your career over again, what is it that you might do differently?
So I kind of already answered that question, but if I could go back in time to Fiscal Advocate, I think I took customers on too quickly when the product wasn't fully baked. And, I think I did some reputational damage to myself. I think I did a disservice to those customers. I would have been less ambitious and more focused on being true to where I was as a business. And I think I still would have won them. I would have won them at a lower cost, but with the right expectation of what they were going to get as a deliverable. So that's one. I think that's the answer. That would be what I would do if I go back in time.
Yeah. So that's an interesting answer. I've heard the opposite before. I mean, especially these days, like we live in this sort of agile mindset world, don't we? Where it's,
I'm not saying you don't sell. I think you sell based on where you're at, though. Hey, David, look, this is a new service. I have one client. I've tested this out. I'm still refining the process. I'm going to give you a discounted rate, but I just want you to know when you come into this, like, it's not fully baked. If I screw up, I don't want you to be like, these guys were a disaster. They totally screwed up. I want you to recognize, he gave this a good try, but he wasn't really ready yet.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. That's probably the better way to do it, isn't it? It's the honesty piece as well to an extent.
Yep.
Because it's easy to oversell, isn't it? Especially these days with all the, there's so much hype everywhere, isn't there, about all the things.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the last thing I bought where it was as good as the advert suggested it might be. And I'm lost. I can't think of anything. Anyway, no, it's a good lesson though. And so the last question is also my favorite question. It's leadership heroes.
Leadership heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, but it can be literally anyone you could think of, so they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or even fictitious, but somebody who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Right now, the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, would probably be that person. First of all, I think what he's done in terms of turning around Microsoft is beyond amazing. But I read his book. I don't remember the name of his book, but he really leads with humanity and caring. And it just seems like a really empathetic leader, at the same time with vision and brilliance behind it.
Yeah, it's a good pick. Not the first time he's been chosen, though, I'm afraid. So no bonus points today. I think what I like most about his story, though, is it's quite rare that you see someone in one of those massive corporations where, it's, the results have been turned around from what was not looking that great from what I read. But also they're leading with that sort of empathetic, what I would recognize as a modern approach to leadership. Because there's another one we mentioned earlier that I won't name drop again, where it seems to be very much the opposite from what I've read. So it's nice to have that example to hold up and say, no, look, if you do it this way, this is what could happen.
Now, what I'll tell you is, like, without you mentioning, I'm guessing like Elon Musk might come to mind as like an opposite style.
Yeah, he wasn't the one I thought of, though, to be fair, but yes.
Okay. But what's interesting with him is, he actually says that he actually doesn't have empathy, and he thinks that that's a strength that makes him a better business person, because he can make decisions, without having this emotional connection that drives him. And both of them, though, have very similar qualities in terms of, like, intensity, demand of performance, what they expect of the team. It's just the style that they go about doing it. And both of them are visionaries, so the difference is I'd actually want to work for Microsoft and I wouldn't want to work for Tesla, so I think that is your method and style attracting, talent.
Yeah, you do have to wonder, don't you, how many of the people working at places like that are happy at work.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's best not go down that rabbit hole today. Well, Jon, it's been great talking to you. I know we're tight for time, so I want to be respectful of yours. The last thing I will ask you is if anyone wants to learn more about what you do or your business, what are the links, the addresses and such, where they can go?
Yep. They can follow me on LinkedIn. I post minimum of 3 times a week, generally about how to grow and, expand your business using financial data. You can go to fiscaladvocate.com. We have a great resource section. And then send me an email, jon@fiscaladvocate.com. I'd love to hear from you.
Perfect. Well, I'll put a selection of those links down there in the show notes so everyone can find them easily. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for being with us today, and have a great rest of your day.
Have a great one as well. Talk to you soon.
Thank you again, Jon, for that conversation. Some really important lessons there for any business owner or aspiring entrepreneur in the audience, as well as some interesting insights there on leadership too. Listener, viewer, if you would like to learn more about Jon, what he does, his company. You will find, as usual, the links to do that down in the show notes. Click on those, go and learn more about him, perhaps reach out, have a conversation with him. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. And if you're looking for leadership support, a conversation about the challenges you are facing as a leader or manager, again, you'll find my links down there as well. Visit leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Plenty of resources there for you for free. And there's also that big green button to hit on the homepage, take you to the sign up for the Integrity Leaders community. And as I said at the beginning, if you have any questions or you'd like to talk about it before you sign up, reach out to me on LinkedIn and let's chat. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope you'll join us again next week when I'll be talking micromanagement, running a business, spirituality, and leadership with my next guest, Joanna Zhang. Until then, as always, be a leader, not a boss.